Welcome back to Sarah's Werewolf Romance collection, the only place where the alphas are possessive, the wastelands are brutal, and the heroines always carry a silver blade. Quick question for the pack before we venture into the ruins today. Where are you listening from right now? Let me know your city in the comments and drop a wolf emoji if you're currently listening with a pet who thinks they are the real alpha of the house. Today, we have a story that is equal parts gritty and spicy. It involves a very stubborn mechanic, a very wounded warlord, and a medical patch that leads to a claim neither of them saw coming. But before we start, if you want to support the collection and get early access to every new chapter, hit that join button down below. It helps me keep the wasteland running and the stories coming. Now, take a deep breath. The air is toxic, the alpha is hungry, and the rules are about to be broken. Let's read. Chapter 1. Sector 4 smelled of rust and dried rain. Bree stopped her matte black hoverbike behind a collapsed concrete pillar and cut the engine. Silence filled the ruins. She grabbed her canvas satchel, slung the thick strap over her shoulder, and walked into the narrow alley. She counted the physical exits out of habit. A rusted fire escape to her left, a chain-link fence ahead, the open street behind her. 3 escape routes should keep me breathing today, she figured. Her hazel eyes scanned the dark shadows. She tapped her scavenged steel wrench against her right thigh. Tap, tap. A nervous tick she could not shake. She needed trade credits. Her older brother vanished in this exact sector 2 years ago. Finding him required bribes, and bribes required high-value gear to sell. In the center of the alley sat a dark steel tactical rover, a heavy beast of a machine. The hood popped open, exposing the complex engine block. A prime target. Bree crept closer. Her boots made zero noise on the cracked asphalt. A military-grade battery sat inside that engine. That piece of tech was worth a full month of food and supplies. She reached the front bumper and leaned over the grill. The metal felt like an open oven. She gripped the heavy battery handle with her left hand and raised her wrench with her right to break the mounting bracket. A giant hand clamped around her throat, the grip like a punch to the gut. The grip pinned her against the side of the steel vehicle. She dropped her wrench. It clattered against the pavement. She grabbed the thick wrist holding her, staring into striking golden eyes. The man stood tall, broad-shouldered, and terrifying. He wore a worn leather jacket. A heavy iron ring sat on the middle finger of his right hand. The scent of pine needles and campfire smoke rolled off his skin. He was an alpha lycanthrope, the apex predator of the wasteland. "Stealing from me is a bad idea, little thief," he growled. His voice carried a heavy push. The alpha command slammed into her chest. It demanded she drop to her knees and submit. Bree gritted her teeth, locking her joints to stay upright. She refused to bow. "I was not stealing," she choked out. "I was inspecting." "This guy is huge, but he looks like he lost a fight with a meat grinder," she noted. A nasty blackened gash tore through his leather jacket and down his bicep. The edges of the wound bubbled with dark blood. Silver poison. The metal burned lichens on contact and stopped their fast healing. The alpha tilted his head to the left. He listened to her heartbeat to catch a lie. Her pulse hammered a frantic, rapid rhythm against her ribs. "Inspecting," he repeated, his tone flat. "Yeah, it looks broken. And so do you." She pointed to his bleeding arm. "Silver?" His grip tightened a fraction. "Raider trap." Bree glanced at her 3 exits. She could kick his knee, grab her wrench, and sprint for the hoverbike. But lichens tracked scents for miles. He would hunt her down the second he recovered. Right now, he was weak. Keeping the predator alive and earning a favor seemed like the smarter play. "Let me go, and I will fix it," she offered. "You are a healer?" he asked. "Unofficial, but I have supplies in my bag." She nudged her canvas satchel with her elbow. The Alpha stared at her for a long moment. He let go of her neck and stepped back, leaning his weight against the tactical rover. He ran brutal hot, acting like a furnace in the cool alley air. He crossed his arms, wincing as the movement pulled his silver wound. "Fix it," he ordered, "or I snap your neck and keep the bag." What a charming and polite guy, Bree thought, rubbing the sore skin on her throat. "Sit down before you pass out and crush me." He ignored her command and stayed standing, stubborn. Bree sighed and unbuckled her canvas satchel. She needed to survive this encounter. The Alpha watched her every move. His golden eyes tracked her hands as she dug into her bag. "Name," he grunted. "Bree." "Cormac, Alpha of the Iron Blood Pack." "Good for you, Cormac. Now hold still." She pulled a canteen of purified water from the satchel. Water was a rare luxury in the wasteland. Every drop counted. She unscrewed the cap. "This is going to sting." Cormac let out a low rumble from his chest. "I have survived worse than a scavenger with a water bottle." "We will see about that," Bree shot back. She poured a small stream of water over the blackened wound. The silver-laced blood washed away, hissing as it hit the pavement. Cormac did not flinch. He stood like a stone statue. His pain tolerance was unnatural. He does not even blink, she realized, feeling a shiver run down her spine. The Alpha was dangerous. She needed to patch him up and get out of Sector 4 before he changed his mind about snapping her neck. Chapter 2. The water washed the worst of the silver poison away, but the deep gash on Cormac's bicep still looked angry and raw. The edges of his torn leather jacket soaked up the excess moisture. Bree screwed the cap back onto her canteen and shoved the container into her canvas satchel. "The poison is out, but that cut needs to stay clean," she told him. Cormac watched her with a steady, amber stare that seemed to glow in the dim light. He remained silent, letting his intimidating presence fill the narrow alley. The heat rolling off his skin felt like an open fire pit. Bree stepped back to put some space between them, but the alley felt too cramped. She reached into her satchel again and pulled out a stiff, yellowed medical patch. It was stale. The edges curled up and the plastic backing looked brittle. She had traded a lot of scrap metal for this single item. It represented a direct hit to her weekly food budget. "Hold out your arm," she instructed. Cormac glanced at the patch in her hand. A frown pulled at his mouth. "That is garbage." "It keeps the dirt out," Bree fired back, peeling the plastic backing off. The adhesive made a sad, dry peeling sound. "And you are bleeding on your fancy tactical rover." "I do not put trash on my skin." "You do if you want to keep your arm attached." She stepped forward and aimed the patch at his bicep. Before the stale adhesive could touch him, his right hand shot out. He caught her wrist. His fingers wrapped around her arm like a steel vise. The heavy iron ring pressed into her skin. He did not squeeze hard enough to bruise, but the message was clear. He was in charge. "This man is impossible to help," Bree thought, glaring at his hand. "Let go, Cormac." Instead of pushing her away, he pulled her hand closer to his face. His golden eyes darkened, the inner beast rising to the surface. He leaned his head down. His tongue dragged over the angry silver scratch on his own arm, wiping away a fresh bead of dark blood. Then, he dragged his tongue over the side of her thumb, tasting the drop of his blood that had smeared on her skin during the cleaning. Bree froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a runaway train. He licked his own wound like a wild animal, she realized, disgusted but fascinated. Cormac looked up through his dark lashes. A wicked, knowing smirk touched his lips. I heal better when you taste me. The raw dominance in his voice made her knees feel weak. It was not the alpha command this time. It was just him. Pure, unfiltered confidence. He let go of her wrist and took a step closer, backing her up against the side of the steel rover. You are insane, Bree breathed out, clutching the ruined medical patch against her chest. I am an alpha. I know what my body needs to recover. He leaned in closer. And I like your scent. You smell like rain and defiance. He is trying to rattle me, she told herself, forcing her spine straight. She tossed the stale patch onto the hood of the rover. It was useless now anyway. You are welcome for the first aid. I will be leaving now. She ducked under his arm and grabbed her scavenged steel wrench from the pavement. She pointed the tool at his chest. Do not follow me. If I run now, he catches me in 3 steps, she calculated, backing away slowly. Cormac chuckled. The sound was deep and rich. Sector 4 is my territory, Bree. I go where I want. She turned her back on him and started walking toward the alley exit, heading for her matte black hoverbike. Her hands shook, but she kept her stride steady. She survived the encounter. She kept her life and her supplies, but the feeling of his tongue on her skin burned like a brand. A loud crash echoed from the street ahead. A rusted trash bin flew past the alley opening, slamming into a brick wall. 3 men stepped into view, blocking her path to the hoverbike. They wore mismatched armor plating and smeared war paint. They carried spiked bats and scavenged rifles aimed right at her chest. Raiders. They did not trade. They took. Bree stopped in her tracks. She gripped her wrench tighter, calculating her odds. 3 armed men against 1 woman with a wrench. Bad odds. Behind her, Cormac let out a low, terrifying growl. The relaxed, arrogant alpha vanished. The predator stepped forward to take his place. His golden eyes locked onto the threat. Get behind me, little scavenger. The trash has arrived. Chapter 3. The raiders fanned out, blocking the only clear exit to the street. One of them raised a rusted rifle, aiming the barrel past Bree and pointing it straight at Cormac. Well, look at this, the lead raider sneered. A broken dog and a little mechanic. Leave the rover and the bag, and we let you walk away. Bree did not wait for Cormac to answer. She dove behind a stack of rotting wooden crates just as the rifle fired. The bullet sparked against the armored plating of the tactical rover. The loud crack echoed through the narrow alley, ringing in her ears. Cormac did not take cover. He charged forward. The alpha moved with terrifying speed. He closed the distance before the shooter could chamber another round. Cormac grabbed the rifle barrel with his left hand, crushing the metal flat. He threw a right hook, driving his fist into the raider's jaw with a sickening crunch. The man hit the ground and did not move. He hits like a runaway freight train, Bree thought, watching from behind the crates. The remaining 2 raiders attacked. One swung a spiked bat at Cormac's head. The alpha ducked, but his silver-poisoned arm slowed him down. He winced, losing his balance for a split second. The second raider pulled a long, jagged hunting knife and lunged at Cormac's blind spot. Bree looked at the street. Her matte black hoverbike sat parked right behind the concrete pillar. The keys were in her pocket. She could run. She could leave the alpha to fight his own battle and escape Sector 4 with her life. It was the smart choice, the survivor's choice. She looked back at the fight. The raider with the knife stepped in close, aiming for Cormac's ribs. That silver blade will kill him if I do nothing, she realized, panic gripping her chest. Bree cursed under her breath. She dropped her wrench and reached down to her right boot. Her fingers closed around the familiar, taped grip of her silver-plated hunting knife. She pulled the blade free and stepped out from behind the crates. She did not hesitate. She threw the knife with all her strength. The silver-plated blade spun through the air and sank deep into the knife-wielding raider's shoulder. The man screamed, dropping his weapon. The silver burned normal humans too, a cold, sharp sting. He stumbled backward, clutching his bleeding arm. The distraction gave Cormac the opening he needed. He grabbed the raider with the spiked bat by the collar of his armor, lifting the man clean off his feet. With a brutal heave, Cormac tossed the raider into the nearest brick wall. The man slumped to the pavement, unconscious. The final raider, the one Bree had stabbed, ripped the silver knife from his shoulder. He glared at Bree, his eyes wide with rage. He took a step toward her, his heavy boots loud on the asphalt. Cormac stepped into his path. The Alpha grabbed the man by the throat and squeezed. "You do not touch her." He threw the raider out of the alley. The man hit the street, scrambled to his feet, and ran for his life, leaving his unconscious friends behind. Silence returned to the alley, broken only by Cormac's heavy breathing. The fight took a severe toll on him. His torn bicep bled fresh, bright red blood. He favored his left side, leaning his weight against a brick wall for support before pushing himself back up. He turned around and walked over to where Bree's knife lay on the ground. He picked it up by the taped handle, careful not to touch the silver blade. He walked toward her and held the knife out, handle first. Bree took it, wiping the blade clean on her canvas satchel strap before sliding it back into her right boot. Her hands shook from the intense adrenaline spike. "You stayed," Cormac stated, staring down at her. "You looked like you needed a hand," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I should have run to the bike," she scolded herself. "Now I am stuck with a giant, angry werewolf." Cormac stepped closer, his chest brushing against hers. The heat rolling off his skin wrapped around her. "You saved my life, Bree." Chapter 4. Cormac stared down at Bree. His golden eyes tracked the rapid rise and fall of her chest. He could smell the sharp, sour tang of adrenaline rolling off her skin, mixed with her natural scent of rain. She tried to act tough, but the violence terrified her. He glanced down at her canvas satchel. The flap hung open from when she pulled out the canteen earlier. A folded piece of thick, waterproof parchment stuck out of the main pocket. Cormac recognized the faded red grid lines printed on the corner. A Sector 4 military map. A rare and dangerous item. Cormac reached out and pulled the map from her bag. As he yanked the parchment free, a broken brass pocket watch tumbled out, hitting the asphalt with a metallic clink. "Hey, give that back!" Bree snapped. She dropped to her knees to grab the watch. Her fingers traced the cracked glass face before shoving the item deep into her pocket. It belonged to her brother. It was all she had left of him. Then she reached for the map in his hand. Cormac held it high above her head, out of reach. He unfolded the thick paper with one hand. His eyes scanned the detailed routes, the marked raider traps, and the hidden underground bunkers. This map showed the location of the rumored clean water sanctuary, the exact thing his dying pack needed to survive. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, low rumble. "I traded for it. It is mine. She jumped, trying to snatch the edge of the paper, but Cormac stepped back without effort. This is a pre-war schematic of the sector. Scavengers do not just trade for these. They kill for them. He folded the map and tucked it inside his leather jacket, pressing it against his chest. I am keeping it. He just robbed me, Bree realized, her anger boiling over. You cannot do that! I saved your life 2 minutes ago. You owe me. I am an alpha. I take what my pack needs. Bree crossed her arms, glaring up at him. She refused to let him win. Her brother was out there, and that map was her only guide. Fine. You keep the map, but you cannot read the cipher notes on the back. I wrote them in code. Without me, you will walk right into a toxic smog field and die. Cormac narrowed his eyes. He listened to her heartbeat. It beat fast but steady. She told the truth. He needed her to navigate the ruins. He looks right through my tough act, she worried, avoiding his gaze. A bargain, then, Cormac offered. You guide me to the sanctuary marked on this map. In return, I let you live, and I protect you from the raiders hunting you. I do not need your protection, she argued. I need my map. You have no choice, Bree. Before she could reach for her knife again, Cormac grabbed her around the waist. He lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. Bree kicked her legs, shouting insults at him, but his grip felt like iron. He carried her to the passenger side of the tactical rover and opened the heavy steel door. He dumped her into the leather seat. The interior of the rover smelled like pine needles and campfire smoke. Wait, my bike! She yelled, pointing toward the concrete pillar. Leave it. You ride with me now. Cormac slammed the thick door shut. A heavy mechanical lock clicked into place, echoing through the dark cabin. Bree grabbed the door handle, planting her boots on the floorboard for leverage, and pulled with all her strength. It refused to budge. The reinforced steel held firm. He locked her in. I just traded one set of problems for a much bigger, much angrier werewolf problem, she thought, sinking back into the seat. Leaving the bike breaks my heart, she admitted to herself, watching the dark alley through the reinforced glass window. Cormac walked around the front of the rover, his boots crunching on the broken glass in the street. He climbed into the driver's seat, filling the cramped space with his broad shoulders and intense body heat. He turned the key. The heavy engine roared to life. He shifted the rover into gear and drove out of the alley, leaving her matte black hoverbike behind in the ruins. Chapter 5. The engine of the dark steel tactical rover roared, a mechanical beast eating up the miles of cracked asphalt. Bree sat trapped in the passenger seat. The heavy lock on the passenger door remained engaged. Escape was impossible at 50 miles per hour. Outside the reinforced glass, the wasteland blurred past in a smear of gray ruins and rusted skeletal structures. Inside the cabin, the tension felt thick enough to choke on. Cormac drove with one hand. His left hand gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. His right arm rested against his thigh, the silver-poisoned gash bleeding sluggishly into the torn leather of his jacket. The metal poison slowed his fast healing to a crawl. The man acted like a furnace. Intense body heat radiated from his broad shoulders, filling the cramped cabin. Bree pressed her back against the passenger door, trying to put as much distance between them as the steel cage allowed. She hugged her canvas satchel against her chest. Inside the bag, the canteen of purified water sloshed with every bump in the road. She hated this. She hated losing her matte black hoverbike. She hated that this giant apex predator held her pre-war map in his jacket pocket. He stole my only chance of finding my brother. And now I am his hostage, Bree realized, a bitter knot twisting in her stomach. Cormac did not speak. His jaw locked tight. He tilted his head a fraction of an inch, listening. The rhythmic thumping of her racing heart echoed in his sharp ears. He focused on the road ahead. The rover crushed debris under massive armored tires. The sun began its descent, painting the toxic sky in bruised shades of purple and burnt orange. "Stop acting like a cornered animal," Cormac ordered. His voice lacked the heavy alpha push, but the raw authority commanded attention. "Stop kidnapping mechanics," Bree shot back. She gripped the canvas strap of her satchel. "You need me to read the cipher. If I pass out from heat stroke in this rolling oven, you get nothing." Cormac shot her a sideways glance. His amber stare pierced right through her bravado. "Roll the window down." Bree found the manual crank and turned it. A blast of cool, stale wasteland air rushed into the cabin, providing immediate relief. She took a deep breath, scanning the horizon. A heavy perimeter fence loomed in the distance. Sharpened iron stakes jutted from the earth, surrounding a sprawling compound of concrete bunkers and scavenged shipping containers. Watchtowers stood at the four corners, manned by sentries carrying long barrel rifles. The Iron Blood Pack Camp. The rover approached the main gates. Two huge enforcers, wearing thick armor plating, hauled the heavy steel doors open. Cormac drove the vehicle into the compound and brought it to a halt in the center of a wide dirt courtyard. He killed the engine. The silence that followed felt deafening. He unlocked the doors with a clack. Out. Bree shoved the door open and dropped to the dirt. She kept her right hand close to the boot holding her silver-plated knife. The moment her boots hit the ground, the entire camp stopped moving. Dozens of people, men, women, and teenagers, turned to look at the center of the courtyard. The pack recognized the rumble of the Alpha's rover. Cormac stepped out of the driver's side. He stood tall, ignoring the fresh blood trickling down his arm. His presence rolled over the compound like a physical wave. It hit the crowd hard. One by one, the wolves dropped. Knees hit the dirt, heads bowed low. The submission rippled through the ranks, a wave of absolute respect for the apex predator. They offered their throats, silent and unmoving. Bree remained standing on the passenger side. She gripped her satchel strap, staring at the sea of bowed heads. She stuck out like a sore thumb. The lone human scavenger, standing upright while a squad of lethal monsters knelt in the dirt. Cormac looked over the roof of the rover. He locked eyes with her, a silent challenge in his expression. He waited to see if she would break under the pressure and join his pack in the dirt. Bree lifted her chin, locking her knees tight. She refused to bow. Chapter 6. The silence in the dirt courtyard stretched. Dozens of kneeling wolves kept their eyes locked on the ground. Bree stood her ground, ignoring the heavy, suffocating aura radiating from the Alpha. Cormac broke the staring contest first. A faint smirk touched his lips. He walked around the front grille of the tactical rover, his boots kicking up dust. A man stepped out from a nearby concrete bunker, ignoring the unspoken rule to bow. He possessed sandy blonde hair and bright blue eyes. A relaxed posture masked the lethal grace in his strides. He wore scavenged tactical gear and an easy smile. This was the beta, the second in command. Declan walked straight toward the rover, his gaze jumping from Cormac's bleeding right bicep to the defiant woman standing by the passenger door. "You look terrible, boss," Declan noted. His tone remained light, a sharp contrast to the brutal environment. "A raider get lucky with a silver blade?" "Lucky for him, yes," Cormac grunted. "He is dead now." Declan chuckled, turning his attention to Bree. He closed the distance, stopping mere inches from her. He leaned down, invading her personal space. His blue eyes assessed her slender build, the uneven chop of her dark brown hair, and the canvas satchel clutched in her hands. He inhaled, catching the scent of her fear and defiance. "And what did you bring us?" Declan asked, a mocking edge slipping into his voice. "We have strict rules against keeping strays. She looks like she would blow away in a strong breeze. Does she do tricks?" Bree did not flinch. She let go of her satchel strap and crossed her arms. "I have one trick," Bree fired back, keeping her voice flat and even. "I can fix a scavenged engine in 10 minutes flat. You, on the other hand, look like your biggest talent is using too much hair gel in a wasteland." The courtyard went dead silent. A collective intake of breath echoed from the kneeling wolves. Disrespecting the beta meant an immediate, violent punishment. Declan blinked, taken aback by the sheer audacity of the insult. He stared at her, waiting for the panic to set in. "I should really learn to keep my mouth shut around giant predators," Bree thought, a cold sweat breaking out on her palms. A deep, rumbling sound shattered the tension. Cormac threw his head back and laughed. The sound was rich and loud, echoing off the iron perimeter fence. The wolves flinched. The alpha laughing was a jarring, rare event that unsettled the pack more than a roar. Declan let out a long breath, a genuine grin replacing his mocking smirk. "She has fangs. I like her." Cormac stopped laughing, his expression shifting back to ruthless stone. He turned to face the kneeling pack. His golden eyes swept over the crowd, daring anyone to challenge his next words. He pushed the alpha command into his voice, the power vibrating through the air. "This scavenger is under my personal protection," Cormac declared. The command washed over the courtyard, sealing her fate. "She stays in my bunker. Anyone who touches her, threatens her, or challenges her deals with me. Understood?" A chorus of low rumbles and murmured agreements answered him. The pack accepted the decree, but Bree noticed the jealous glares. The unbonded females stared daggers at her. Being claimed by the alpha, even for protection, put a giant target on her back. The Iron Blood pack operated on strength, and a human outsider getting premium treatment sparked instant resentment. "Get up," Cormac commanded the pack. The wolves rose to their feet, dispersing back to their duties, though many kept a watchful eye on the newcomer. Cormac gestured toward the largest concrete bunker at the far end of the compound. "Declan, take her bag. Show her inside." Bree clutched her satchel tighter. Inside sat her water canteen and her broken pocket watch. She refused to hand it over. "I can carry my own things." Cormac did not argue. He looked exhausted, the silver poison taking its toll on his giant frame. He turned and headed toward a different structure marked with a faded red cross, the healer's den. "Right this way, mechanic," Declan hummed, gesturing for her to follow. "Welcome to the safest, deadliest place on Earth." Chapter 7. Declan led Bree into the huge concrete structure and left her alone. The heavy steel door shut with a resounding clang, echoing off the bare walls. Bree dropped her canvas satchel onto the cold floor and took stock of her new cage. The Alpha's bunker offered no luxury. The walls consisted of thick, gray concrete built to withstand explosive blasts. A single thin mattress lay across an iron cot in the corner. A rusted metal footlocker sat at the base of the bed. No windows existed in the pre-war structure, leaving the room illuminated only by a flickering neon bulb hanging from a frayed wire on the ceiling. The air inside the room bit at her skin. The wasteland night brought a brutal chill, plunging the temperatures down. Bree wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. She walked over to the corner where a square metal grate covered a ventilation duct. A scavenged electric heater sat bolted to the wall beside it. She hit the power switch. Nothing happened. She knelt and inspected the unit. The power cables hung loose, severed at the base. The heating coils were rusted completely shut. Fixing this would require tools she did not have, since her steel wrench remained miles away on the alley pavement. The broken heater stayed broken. Brilliant, Bree muttered to herself, her breath forming small white clouds in the frigid air. The undisputed king of the ruins lives in a walk-in freezer. She refused to sleep on the bare concrete. She walked over to the iron cot and sat on the edge of the thin mattress. She kept her thick canvas jacket on. She also kept her boots on. The silver-plated hunting knife remained securely sheathed in her right boot. She needed the weapon close. Surrounded by lethal monsters, letting her guard down invited disaster. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to conserve body heat. Exhaustion pulled at her eyes, but the freezing temperature kept her awake. Every hour, the cold dug deeper into her bones. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the broken brass pocket watch. She traced the cracked glass face with her thumb, seeking comfort in the familiar object. It offered none. She shoved the watch back into her pocket and rested her head on her knees. If I do not freeze to death tonight, the pack will probably tear me apart tomorrow, she worried, squeezing her eyes shut. An hour past midnight, the heavy steel door unlatched. It swung open without a knock. Cormac stepped into the bunker. He looked worse than before. The pack's healer had scrubbed the wound clean, but the thick, raised scar tissue of a fresh silver burn marked his right bicep. He no longer wore his worn leather jacket. He entered wearing only dark canvas pants, his broad, scarred chest exposed to the freezing air. He shut the door, sealing them inside. He spotted Bree shivering on the edge of the narrow iron cot. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. The intense heat radiating from his skin hit her like a physical force. The ambient temperature in her immediate vicinity spiked. "You are freezing," Cormac stated, a frown pulling at his lips. "Your heater is dead," Bree countered, her teeth chattering. "I would fix it, but I left my wrench in Sector 4. Cormac did not look at the broken unit. He did not care about mechanics right now. His primal instincts drove his actions. He stepped right up to the cot. "Move over," he ordered. Bree scrambled backward, pressing her spine against the freezing concrete wall. "What are you doing?" "You need heat. I run hot." Cormac climbed onto the iron cot. The frame groaned under his immense weight. He stretched out on his back, occupying the majority of the thin mattress. "Lie down." Bree stared at him, bewildered. The man was a walking furnace, but sharing a bed with the Alpha felt like stepping into a lion's den. "I am fine. I can sit right here." Cormac shifted his head, his predatory gaze locking onto her trembling frame. The inner beast shone through his eyes, demanding obedience from the freezing scavenger. "I am not asking, Bree. I am your personal heater for the night. Lie down before I pull you down." Chapter 8. Morning arrived without sunlight. The windowless concrete bunker remained trapped in perpetual twilight, illuminated only by the struggling neon bulb overhead. Bree woke to a suffocating weight and a brutal, sweltering heat. She cracked her hazel eyes open. A solid wall of muscle occupied her vision. Cormac lay on his side, facing her. His chest expanded and contracted in a slow, steady rhythm. The ambient temperature of the mattress felt like a blazing desert noon. The shivering from the previous night was a distant memory. Now, Sweat beaded on her forehead. She felt like meat roasting on a spit. Cormac had shifted during the night, his massive left arm draped over her waist, pinning her against the mattress. The heavy iron ring on his right hand rested near her face, the silver burned bicep facing the ceiling. His leg hooked over her shins, locking her boots in place. He had trapped her entirely. He held her like a prized possession. Bree tried to take a deep breath, but the pressure across her ribs restricted her lungs. She needed to get up. She needed to grab her canvas satchel, slip out of the heavy steel door, and explore the Ironblood camp to find an escape route. She placed her hands flat against the mattress and pushed. She tried to slide her hips out from under his heavy forearm. She moved an inch. Cormac's breathing hitched. Even asleep, his reflexes were lethal. The second she pulled away from his core, the Alpha reacted. His left arm clamped down, crushing her back against his chest with brutal force. He buried his face into the crook of her neck. He inhaled a deep breath, filling his lungs with her scent of rain and defiance. The primal, possessive action sent a jolt of panic straight through her spine. She froze, her hands hovering in the air. "Stay," Cormac ordered. His voice rumbled against her collarbone. It was thick with sleep, rough and gravelly, but laced with the undeniable power of the Alpha command. The heavy push forced her muscles to lock up. Her body betrayed her mind, obeying the dominant command without hesitation. She dropped her hands back to the mattress. Cormac did not open his eyes. He tightened his grip around her waist, ensuring she could not wiggle away again. He dragged his nose along her jawline, his hot breath fanning across her skin. The proximity was overwhelming. He treated her like a packmate, like something that belonged to him. He is a monster. But right now he is holding me like I am the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth, Bree realized, a strange flutter erupting in her chest. She pushed the foreign feeling down, forcing logic to take over. She was a scavenger. He was a warlord. She needed her map, and she needed her brother. Surviving meant staying detached. Letting the Alpha mark her as his property guaranteed her death in a place like this. The jealous glares from the courtyard flashed through her memory. "Cormac," Bree whispered, her voice tight. "Let me up." The Alpha ignored her request. He adjusted his weight, pressing closer. The heat of his bare chest burned through her thick canvas jacket. He let out a low, satisfied hum from the back of his throat. He drifted back into a deep, healing sleep, his body working hard to repair the silver burn on his bicep. Bree sighed, letting her head fall back against the thin pillow. She was trapped. The iron cot offered no leverage. Her right boot, hiding the silver-plated knife, was pinned under his heavy leg. She stared at the cracked ceiling of the concrete bunker, tracing the spiderweb fractures in the gray stone, counting the seconds. She had survived Sector 4, raider attacks, and the unforgiving elements of the toxic ruins. Now, her biggest threat was surviving the terrifying affection of a wasteland Alpha. She lay perfectly still, listening to the slow, steady thump of his heartbeat against her spine, waiting for the apex predator to wake. Chapter 9. Cormac shifted in his sleep, groaning as the thick, raised scar tissue on his right bicep pulled against the thin mattress. He rolled slightly onto his back. The movement lifted his right arm just enough to break the iron cage he had formed around Bree's waist. She did not waste a single second. Bree slid her hips toward the edge of the iron cot, wincing as the rusted springs squeaked under her weight. The Alpha let out a low rumble from the back of his throat, his golden eyes remaining shut. He settled back into a deep, healing slumber, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. Bree slipped her boots onto the freezing concrete floor. Her right boot felt heavier, a comforting reminder of the silver-plated hunting knife sheathed inside. She grabbed her canvas satchel from the base of the cot, slung the thick strap over her shoulder, and walked toward the heavy steel door. If I stay in this concrete box waiting for him to wake up, I lose whatever small advantage I have left, she calculated, her pulse thumping a rapid beat against her ribs. She unlatched the door, slipping out into the Ironblood compound. The morning air bit at her cheeks, a harsh contrast to the sweltering heat radiating off the Alpha inside. The courtyard buzzed with chaotic energy. Scavengers hauled scrap metal toward a makeshift forge. Pack members sparred in the dirt, their movements blindingly fast and vicious. The scent of roasting meat and damp earth hung thick in the toxic breeze. Bree kept her head down, pulling the collar of her thick canvas jacket up to block the chill. She navigated the perimeter, searching for the structure marked with a faded red cross. She found it nestled between two collapsed shipping containers. She pushed the wooden door open. The healer's den smelled of dried sage and stinging antiseptic. A middle-aged woman with silver streaks in her dark hair stood over a metal table, grinding a bundle of dried roots with a stone pestle. "I need supplies," Bree stated, stepping into the dim room. The healer looked up, her dark eyes narrowing. "You are the scavenger the Alpha brought in. I am Maeve. We do not hand out free medicine to outsiders." "I am not asking for charity." Bree reached into her pants pocket and pulled out the broken brass pocket watch. She placed the tarnished metal on the table. "This is pre-war mechanics, solid brass housing. It holds an exorbitant value at the border markets. I want a proper bandage for my blistered heels and 3 days of dried food rations." Maeve picked up the watch, inspecting the cracked glass face. Before she could answer, the wooden door slammed open, hitting the interior wall with a loud crack. A huge enforcer stepped into the den. He stood a full head taller than Bree, his shoulders stretching the seams of his armored vest. A jagged scar cut across his left cheek. He glared down at her, his lips curling into a vicious sneer. "The human thinks she can trade pack resources," the enforcer mocked, his voice a guttural scrape. He reached out and grabbed the strap of her canvas satchel. "Hand over the bag, Stray. You do not own anything here." Bree planted her boots on the floorboards. She refused to let go. "Get your hands off my property or I will break your fingers." The enforcer laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. He yanked the strap with brutal force, tearing the satchel from her grip. The rough canvas burned the skin off her palms. He shoved her backward. Bree hit the edge of the metal table, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. A shadow filled the doorway. Cormac stepped into the den. He wore his dark canvas pants, his massive chest bare and radiating a furious, suffocating heat. He did not yell. He did not issue an Alpha command. He simply moved. He crossed the room in a blur of motion. Cormac grabbed the enforcer by the armored collar, lifting the man off his boots. With a sickening crunch, Cormac drove his fist into the enforcer's jaw. The man's head snapped back. Cormac threw him out the open door, sending the unconscious wolf crashing into the dirt courtyard. Cormac picked up the canvas satchel from the floor and handed it back to Bree. While the Alpha stood over the fallen enforcer, Bree reached onto the metal table and snatched her brass watch back from under Maeve's hand. If they were going to treat her like a stray, she wasn't paying for the privilege. Cormac's amber irises glowed with total, unhinged violence as he watched her. "No one touches what is mine." Chapter 10. The atmosphere inside the Ironblood compound shifted as the afternoon dragged into a bruising purple twilight. The air grew thick, humming with a strange electric tension that made Bree's skin crawl. Wolves paced the perimeter fences, their boots kicking up clouds of dust. Low growls echoed from the shadows. Fights broke out over minor offenses, ending in blood and snapped bones. Bree sat on the rusted metal footlocker inside the Alpha's bunker, watching the chaos through the open steel door. She clutched her canvas satchel in her lap. Inside the main pocket, her canteen of purified water sloshed against the broken brass pocket watch she had retrieved from Maeve. The pack was losing its collective mind. If I do not get out of this camp before the sun sets, these monsters will tear each other apart and take me down with them, Bree realized, a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead. She needed her matte black hoverbike. The machine sat parked behind a concrete pillar in Sector 4, leagues away from this madness. It was her only ticket out of the wasteland, her only chance to find her missing brother. She could not wait for Cormac to negotiate. She had to run. Bree stood up, adjusting her thick canvas jacket. She checked her right boot, ensuring the silver-plated hunting knife remained secure against her calf. She stepped out of the bunker, keeping her footsteps silent against the packed dirt. She hugged the shadows of the concrete walls, moving toward the main gates. The sentries in the watchtowers looked distracted, their heads twitching toward the rising moon. Bree slipped behind a stack of rusted oil drums, holding her breath as a patrol of enforcers marched past. "Leaving so soon, mechanic?" Bree spun around. Declan leaned against the perimeter fence, blocking her path to the gates. The beta wore his usual scavenged tactical gear, but his relaxed posture was gone. His muscles bunched tight. His bright blue eyes flashed to a terrifying luminous yellow, reflecting the rising moonlight. "Get out of my way, Declan," Bree demanded, dropping her hand toward her right boot. Declan let out a strange chuckle, gripping the iron fence to keep his hands from shaking. "I cannot do that. The moon calls, sweetheart. It drags the beast out of us, kicking and screaming. You stepping out there right now is a death sentence. We hunt anything that runs." Before Bree could draw her blade, a wall of blistering heat slammed into her back. Cormac grabbed her upper arm. His grip felt like a steel vise, bruising her flesh through the thick jacket sleeve. He spun her around to face him. The Alpha looked wrecked. Sweat poured down his face, soaking his dark hair. His chest heaved with ragged, uneven breaths. The thick silver scar on his right bicep pulsed an angry red, fighting the chaotic energy coursing through his veins. "I told you to stay in the bunker," Cormac grunted, his voice dropping into a monstrous, inhuman register. "I am not a prisoner," Bree shouted, struggling against his iron hold. "Let me go get my bike!" Cormac did not argue. He did not waste breath on logic. He hauled her off her feet, dragging her away from the gates and back toward his concrete shelter. Bree kicked and thrashed, her boots connecting with his shins, but hitting him felt like kicking a brick wall. He ignored the blows completely. He dragged her through the bunker doorway and shoved her inside. She stumbled, catching her balance on the edge of the iron cot. Cormac grabbed the heavy steel door. He slammed it shut with a deafening clang that rattled the walls. He threw the heavy deadbolt into place, locking them inside the windowless room. The only light came from the flickering neon bulb overhead. Cormac turned to face her, his amber irises bleeding into a blinding, predatory gold. His body trembled violently as the bones in his hands began to crack. "No one leaves tonight, Bree. Especially not you." Chapter 11. The concrete bunker felt smaller than a coffin. Bree backed away from the steel door, pressing her spine against the freezing gray wall. The heavy deadbolt locked her inside with a monster losing his grip on humanity. Cormac collapsed onto the floor. He hit the concrete on his hands and knees, a raw, guttural scream tearing from his throat. The sound hit Bree like a punch to the gut, making her ears ring. The shift offered no mercy. It demanded pain. Beneath his dark canvas pants and scarred skin, Cormac's bones began to break. The sickening snap and crunch of his skeleton reshaping echoed in the cramped space. His spine elongated, jutting against his flesh. His shoulders broadened, tearing muscle and knitting it back together in brutal, rapid succession. Bree slid down the wall until she hit the floor. She pulled her knees to her chest, her hands trembling violently. She reached down to her right boot, her fingers wrapped around the taped handle of her silver-plated hunting knife. She drew the blade, holding the deadly metal out in front of her. I will not die in this rusted box without a fight, no matter how big the predator gets, she promised herself, locking her wrists to steady the weapon. Cormac's human cries dissolved into a terrifying, deep-chested snarl. Dark, coarse fur erupted from his skin, swallowing the thick silver scar on his right bicep. His jaw shattered and pushed forward, forming a massive, lethal snout lined with razor-sharp teeth. The heat in the room spiked to a suffocating level, baking the air until it felt hard to breathe. Then, the snapping stopped. Silence filled the bunker, broken only by the heavy, wet sound of a huge animal breathing. A beast stood in the center of the room. The timber wolf was gargantuan, its shoulders reaching the height of a grown man's chest. Midnight dark fur covered immense, corded muscles. The alpha predator turned its head, luminous gold eyes locked onto Bree. The wolf took a slow, deliberate step toward her. Its paws made zero sound on the concrete. Bree raised the silver knife higher. Her knuckles turned white. "Stay back," she choked out, her voice cracking under the terror. The wolf did not care about the blade. It knew the silver could burn, could poison its blood, but it pushed forward anyway. It closed the distance, standing directly over her, the heat rolling off the beast soaked into her thick canvas jacket. Bree squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the bite. She braced for the jaws to snap around her neck and end her wasteland survival run. Instead, a hot, damp nose pressed against the collar of her jacket. The huge wolf lowered its head, dropping its incredible weight until it lay on the floor right beside her. It pushed its snout past the silver blade, ignoring the threat entirely. The beast nuzzled its face into the crook of her neck. It inhaled a long, deep breath, filling its lungs with her unique scent of rain. A low, vibrating rumble started in the wolf's chest. It was not a growl. It was a purr. The alpha recognized her. Even stripped of his human mind, driven by wild instincts and full moon chaos, the beast refused to harm her. It claimed the space beside her, resting its huge dark head across her lap. It pinned her legs to the floor, acting as a brutal, lethal shield against the rest of the world. Bree slowly lowered the silver knife. Her hands shook as she rested her palm flat against the thick, dark fur on the wolf's neck. The beast closed its golden eyes, leaning into her touch. Chapter 12. Morning light failed to penetrate the windowless bunker, but the exhaustion settling deep into Bree's bones signaled the start of a new day. She sat on the edge of the iron cot, her canvas satchel resting at her feet. Across the room, Cormac stood with his back to her. The shift back to human form left him just as wrecked as the change into the beast. He had pulled a fresh pair of dark canvas pants from the metal footlocker, though his broad, scarred back remained bare. The thick silver burn on his right arm looked inflamed and angry. He braced his hands against the concrete wall, his head hanging low between his shoulders. The Alpha radiated a foul, dark mood. Vulnerability disgusted him. Showing his wolf form to a human scavenger crossed a line he never intended to bridge. "You shed everywhere," Bree remarked, breaking the tense silence. Cormac pushed off the wall and spun around. His amber irises flared with irritation. "Do not push me this morning, Bree. I am not in the mood for your sarcasm." "And I am not in the mood to be held hostage." She crossed her arms, staring him down. "You locked me in a box with a feral animal. You stole my map. You owe me answers." Cormac walked over to the rusted metal footlocker. His worn leather jacket lay folded on top of the lid. He snatched the garment up, checking the interior pocket to ensure the thick, waterproof parchment remained safe. He shoved his arms into the sleeves, wincing as the leather scraped his silver scar. "I owe you nothing," he grunted, zipping the jacket halfway up his chest. "I kept you alive. Out there, the pack would have torn you apart." He refuses to admit he needs my help, hiding behind his title like a coward, Bree thought, her temper flaring hot and fast. She stood up, closing the distance between them. She tilted her chin up to meet his furious gaze. "You need me. Without me, you cannot read the cipher on the back of that map. You walk into Sector 4 alone, and you die in the smog traps. So tell me the truth. Why does the big, bad warlord of the Iron Blood Pack care so much about a rumored water sanctuary?" Cormac's jaw clenched. The muscles in his neck jumped. He glared down at her, listening to the steady, rapid beat of her heart. She refused to back down. She demanded respect, and to his absolute frustration, he found himself willing to give it. "Because they are dying," Cormac admitted, his voice dropping into a harsh rasp. Bree blinked, the anger draining from her posture. "Who?" "My pack." Cormac turned away, running a hand through his dark, messy hair. "The wasteland smog is settling into the valley. The groundwater is toxic. The fast healing keeps the fighters standing, but the pups and the elders cannot fight the poison. They are getting sick. Their bodies are failing." He looked back at her, the predatory dominance vanishing, replaced by a desperate, crushing burden. "I am the Alpha," he stated, his tone lacking the heavy command, carrying only raw honesty. "My job is to keep them breathing. If I do not find that clean water sanctuary, my pack will not survive the winter. I need your map, Bree. I need the cipher." Bree stared at the imposing warlord. He did not want power or trade credits. He wanted to save his family. She understood that kind of desperation perfectly. She thought of her broken brass pocket watch and the missing brother she refused to give up on. "I will read the cipher," Bree agreed softly, "but you help me find my brother in Sector 4 first." Chapter 13. The heavy steel door of the bunker swung inward, groaning on rusted hinges. Declan stepped into the windowless room, carrying 2 scavenged canteens and a bundle of dried rations wrapped in wax paper. He tossed the supplies onto the rusted metal footlocker. He wore fresh tactical gear, the dark fabric clean of the courtyard dust, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed a lingering exhaustion from the full moon. Cormac stood beside the broken electric heater. He unzipped his worn leather jacket, reached into the interior pocket, and pulled out the thick, waterproof parchment. He unfolded the map across the thin mattress of the iron cot. The pre-war schematic displayed Sector 4 in intricate detail, covered in faded red grid lines and topographical markings. Bree stepped closer to the cot, her boots scuffing against the freezing concrete floor. She stared down at the map, tracing a finger over a sprawling expanse of collapsed concrete canyons and rusted skeletal structures. She flipped the heavy parchment over. The back of the map held lines of cramped, erratic handwriting rendered in smudged graphite. The water sanctuary sits beneath the old transit hub in the center of the sector, Declan pointed out, leaning over the cot. He tapped a thick finger on a straight, wide boulevard marked on the front of the map. We take the tactical rover straight down the main artery. It cuts our travel time in half. We punch through the outer ruins and hit the hub before the local scavengers even know we crossed the border. Bree shook her head, keeping her eyes locked on the graphite cipher on the back of the parchment. You take that road, you end up a permanent stain on the asphalt. The main artery is a death trap. Declan crossed his arms, his bright blue eyes narrowing. He lacked the predatory aggression of the Alpha, but the Beta tolerated zero disrespect regarding pack safety. I have run border patrols for a decade, mechanic. A straight line is the fastest route to keep this pack alive. Fast does not equal safe, Bree shot back. She pointed to a specific cluster of graphite symbols. This section of the cipher details the Warlord's perimeter defenses. The straight road passes under a collapsed overpass. The raiders rigged the entire structure with pre-war incendiary charges. You drive a heavy steel rover over the pressure plates, and the overpass drops 10 tons of burning concrete on your roof. Cormac leaned forward, bracing his left hand on the iron cot frame. He favored his right side, keeping his silver-burned bicep still to avoid pulling the inflamed, thick scar tissue. His golden eyes flicked from the map to Bree, analyzing her confidence. He tilted his head a fraction of an inch, listening to the steady, calm rhythm of her heartbeat. She spoke the truth. If I prove my worth to the second in command, they cannot dispose of me when this mission ends, Bree thought, lifting her chin to meet Declan's doubting stare. She reads the code, Declan, Cormac stated, his rough voice leaving no room for argument. We follow her path. Declan let out a tight breath, his posture relaxing a fraction. He looked at the cipher, acknowledging the danger he almost drove them into. He gave Bree a slow, reluctant nod of respect. All right, scavenger. What is the alternate route? We skirt the eastern edge, Bree explained, flipping the map back to the front. She traced a winding path through a maze of narrow alleyways and abandoned industrial blocks. It forces us to abandon the rover halfway. The streets grow too narrow for a vehicle that wide. We walk the last 3 miles on foot, moving through the underground utility tunnels to bypass the Warlord sentries. Cormac traced the winding route with his eyes, calculating the risks. Moving on foot stripped them of the rover's armor, leaving them exposed to the toxic wasteland elements and feral predators. But avoiding the incendiary trap guaranteed they at least reached the transit hub alive. He folded the thick parchment with his left hand and tucked the map back into his leather jacket. Gather the remaining enforcers, Cormac ordered his beta, stepping away from the cot. We leave in 10 minutes. Tell them to pack extra ammunition and leave the heavy plating behind. We move fast and quiet. Declan nodded, grabbing the spare canteens from the footlocker. He turned and exited the bunker, leaving the door wide open. Bree grabbed her canvas satchel, the broken brass pocket watch weighing heavy in her pocket. The alliance was set. They were walking straight into the most dangerous territory on Earth. Chapter 14. The dirt courtyard buzzed with a tense, chaotic energy as the Iron Blood Pack cleaned up the aftermath of the moon. Wolves dragged shattered wooden crates and twisted scrap metal toward the perimeter fences. The morning sky hung heavy with toxic, bruised purple clouds, blocking out the sun and casting a grim shadow over the compound. Bree walked toward the dark steel tactical rover parked in the center of the camp. Every step sent a sharp jolt of pain up her leg. The previous day's brutal pace had rubbed the skin on her heels raw. She stopped beside the heavy passenger door, wincing. She dropped her canvas satchel onto the dirt and crouched down. She unlaced her right boot, pulling the leather collar wide. The silver-plated hunting knife strapped to her calf pressed directly against the inflamed blister, making it impossible to walk the required 3 miles through Sector 4. She unbuckled the sheath, pulled the silver weapon free, and shoved the blade deep into the main pocket of her canvas satchel. She laced her boot back up, savoring the immediate relief. She stood, grabbed the satchel by the strap, and tossed the bag onto the passenger seat of the rover. She left the heavy steel door hanging open and leaned against the front grille to wait. Cormac walked across the courtyard, his broad shoulders cutting a path through the scattered pack members. He wore fresh, dark canvas pants, having swapped out the shredded garments from his shift, and kept his worn leather jacket zipped tight. Declan flanked him, carrying a crate of scavenged rifle ammunition. The Beta loaded the heavy crate into the rear cargo hold of the rover, securing the latch with a loud metallic clack. "Mount up," Cormac ordered, pulling the driver's side door open. Bree rounded the front bumper and climbed into the passenger seat. She pulled the heavy door shut. The mechanical lock refused to click. She yanked the handle twice, but the rusted pre-war mechanism jammed halfway, leaving the door loose in its frame. She let out an exasperated sigh, deciding to hold the handle closed during the ride. Cormac slid behind the steering wheel. He turned the ignition key. The engine sputtered, coughed a cloud of black exhaust, and died. The Alpha frowned, his golden eyes narrowing. He turned the key a second time. The starter motor whined a high, desperate pitch, but the engine refused to turn over. A sharp, chemical burning sensation hit the back of Bree's throat. It stung her eyes, harsh and unnatural. "Kill the ignition!" Bree shouted, recognizing the hazard immediately. Cormac yanked the key out. He kicked his door open and stepped out onto the dirt. Bree pushed her jammed door wide and followed him to the front of the vehicle. Cormac dropped to one knee, inspecting the undercarriage. A dark, slick puddle spread over the dry earth, the fuel still dripping in a steady, fast stream from the severed line. It was fresh, the work of a shadow that had only just vanished. "Fuel," Declan stated, dropping his relaxed posture in a heartbeat. The Beta drew a heavy pistol from his hip holster, his bright blue eyes scanning the surrounding courtyard. Bree knelt beside the puddle, her hazel eyes tracking the leak upward. She pointed to a thick rubber hose hanging loose beneath the engine block. The edge of the hose looked jagged and uneven. "That is not wear and tear. A blade cut that line. Someone drains your tank on purpose." Cormac stood up, his jaw locking into a rigid line. The implication struck hard and fast. No raider could breach the perimeter fences unnoticed during the aftermath of a full moon. The sabotage came from inside the compound. "A traitor breathes my air and eats my food, and I will tear them apart the moment I find them," Cormac promised, a lethal, vibrating fury radiating from his scarred chest. Before the Alpha could issue a command, a blood-curdling shriek shattered the morning quiet. The sound did not come from a human throat. It echoed from the eastern perimeter line, a chaotic, desperate howl that made the hair on Bree's arm stand up. The iron-blood wolves in the courtyard froze, their heads snapping toward the rusted iron fence. The chemical sting of the spilled fuel masked the approach of the threat until it was right on top of them. 3 emaciated, feral wolves vaulted over the iron stakes of the perimeter fence. They hit the dirt running. rogues. Driven mad by starvation and the lingering chaos of the moon, they charged straight into the heart of the Ironblood camp, their jaws snapping at the air. Chapter 15. Panic erupted across the dirt courtyard. The Ironblood pack scrambled, caught entirely off guard by the daylight breach. The three feral rogues moved with chaotic, unpredictable speed. Starvation stripped away their natural caution, leaving nothing but wild, unhinged aggression. Their ribs jutted against matted, filthy fur. Foam dripped from their snapping jaws as they tore through the center of the camp. "Defend the perimeter!" Declan roared. The beta did not bother shifting. The transformation required precious seconds they did not possess. He raised his heavy pistol, tracking the fastest rogue as it lunged toward a group of unarmed Omegas. Declan fired twice. The loud cracks echoed off the concrete bunkers. The rogue stumbled, a bloom of dark red staining its shoulder, but the beast refused to fall, driven by sheer adrenaline. Bree stood exposed near the front bumper of the tactical rover. The chemical sting of the spilled fuel burned her nose. She reached for her right boot, her fingers grasping empty air. Panic spiked cold and sharp in her chest. She had moved the silver-plated hunting knife to ease her blister. Her weapon sat inside her canvas satchel, resting on the passenger seat. She lunged for the passenger door, wrapping her fingers around the metal handle. She pulled. The jammed mechanism snagged, refusing to yield. The heavy steel door stayed stuck in the frame, locking her out of the cabin and away from her only defense. She yanked the handle again, her boot sliding in the slick puddle of fuel. She lunged for the driver's side door, but a second rogue skidded around the front bumper, its yellow teeth bared, cutting off her only other path to the cabin. She was trapped against the exterior steel. A low, guttural snarl sounded right behind her. Bree spun around, pressing her spine against the reinforced glass of the passenger window. One of the feral rogues abandoned the pack fight and locked its wild, sunken eyes on her. It saw easy prey, a human scavenger, cornered and unarmed. The beast dug its heavy paws into the dirt, coiling its emaciated muscles for a lethal strike. The rogue leaped, its jaws opening wide to crush her throat. Bree threw her arms up to shield her face, bracing for the tearing of flesh. The impact never came. A massive blur of dark canvas and leather slammed into the feral wolf mid-air. Cormac hit the beast with the force of a falling boulder. The Alpha tackled the rogue to the unforgiving ground, prioritizing the scavenger's life over his own tactical advantage. They rolled through the dirt, a violent tangle of human strength and feral desperation. The rogue thrashed, frantic and unpredictable. It twisted its long neck, snapping its jaws in a wild arc. The beast's teeth found purchase. The feral wolf sank its fangs deep into Cormac's upper chest, tearing through the worn leather jacket and puncturing the muscle beneath. He threw his life away for a human he met yesterday, Bree realized, a sickening wave of horror washing over her as the Alpha let out a harsh, grunting breath. Cormac did not scream. He ignored the brutal agony ripping through his chest. He grabbed the rogue by the scruff of its matted neck with his left hand, pinning the beast against the earth. He brought his right fist down like a hammer, striking the wolf behind the ear. The feral creature went limp, its jaws going slack as it collapsed into the dust. Across the courtyard, Declan and a squad of enforcers dispatched the remaining two rogues, their heavy boots stepping back from the ruined bodies. The chaos died down, replaced by the heavy, ragged breathing of the surviving pack members. Cormac pushed the dead rogue off his torso. He tried to stand, bracing his hand against the bumper of the rover, but his legs betrayed him. He dropped to his knees. Dark blood poured from the jagged bite wound on his chest, soaking the front of his torn leather jacket. He coughed, a wet, terrible sound, and slumped sideways into the dirt. "Cormac!" Bree shouted, dropping to the ground beside him. She pressed her bare hands against his chest, trying to stem the bleeding, but the Alpha was already losing consciousness. Chapter 16. Bree's knees hit the wooden floorboards of the healer's den with a hard thud. She and Declan hauled Cormac's dead weight across the threshold, leaving a trail of dark blood in the dirt courtyard. They hoisted the Alpha onto the central metal table. The reinforced legs buckled slightly under his immense frame, but held firm. "Get his jacket off," Maeve ordered, rushing from the back corner of the den with an armful of supplies. Bree grabbed the lapels of the ruined leather jacket. She pulled the garment down his arms, wincing as the rough material dragged across the thick silver scar on his right bicep. She tossed the heavy coat onto a nearby chair, listening for the crinkle of the waterproof map inside the pocket to ensure it remained safe. Cormac's chest looked like a slaughterhouse. The feral rogue had torn a jagged, uneven chunk of flesh just below his collarbone. The wound bubbled with a foul, yellowish discharge. This was not a normal bite. It carried wasteland rot, a lethal infection common in starving, desperate predators. "The fast healing cannot fight the rot," Maeve stated, her dark eyes scanning the wound. She pushed a bundle of crushed, dried roots into Bree's hands. The plant matter felt coarse and smelled like bitter earth. "Pack the wound. Push the roots deep into the torn muscle. It will burn the infection out, but you have to hold him down." Bree did not hesitate. She stepped up to the edge of the metal table. Cormac ran a terrifying fever. His skin radiated a blistering, unnatural heat that scorched her palms. Sweat poured down his face, pasting his dark hair to his forehead. His golden eyes rolled back, trapped in a deep, agonizing fever haze. Declan clamped his hands down on Cormac's shoulders, using his entire body weight to pin the Alpha to the metal table. "Do it, scavenger." Bree shoved the handful of crushed roots directly into the open, bleeding wound. Cormac let out a raw, deafening roar. His back arched off the table, his muscles corded tight, fighting the searing agony of the wasteland medicine. He thrashed against Declan's hold, his physical strength surging in a blind panic. His right hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around Bree's wrist like an iron manacle. The heavy iron ring dug deep into her skin. He pulled her down, forcing her to lean over his burning chest. His golden eyes snapped open, clouded and unfocused by the raging fever. He stared right through her, lost in the delirium. "Sector 4, Cormac rasped, his voice a broken, wet gravel. He squeezed her wrist harder, refusing to let her pull away. "The Warlord. He took the boy. I knew." Bree froze. The breath vanished from her lungs. She stared down at the bleeding Warlord, the bitter smell of the root medicine forgotten. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her brother. The missing boy she sacrificed everything to find. The truth will make her run, but the fever steals my control, Cormac confessed to the empty air, his grip going slack as unconsciousness finally dragged him under. His arm dropped, hitting the edge of the metal table. The Alpha lay completely still, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. Bree stood frozen, staring at the unconscious man who just saved her life. He knew. The entire time they bargained for the map, the entire time he forced her into the tactical rover, he knew exactly who held her brother captive. He hid the truth to secure her cooperation. The alliance was built on a foundation of lies, and the Alpha had played her from the very start. Chapter 17. The silence in the healer's den suffocated the room. Bree stared down at the unconscious Alpha lying on the metal table. The bitter scent of crushed roots filled the cramped space, masking the copper tang of his blood. Cormac's fever raged, blistering his skin. His chest rose in shallow, ragged jerks. The confession hung in the stagnant air, a brutal truth ripped from his delirium. He knew. The Warlord had her brother. Cormac possessed the answer to her 2-year nightmare from the moment they met in the alley, and he chose to weaponize that knowledge. He traded her compliance for his pack's survival, wrapping his manipulation in the guise of a protective bargain. Bree stepped backward, putting distance between herself and the metal table. Her boots scraped against the wooden floorboards. She turned her gaze to the beta. Declan stood near the foot of the cot, wiping a smear of dark rogue blood from his cheek. His bright blue eyes met hers, lacking their usual relaxed humor. "Did you know?" Bree demanded, her voice a sharp, jagged edge. Declan blinked, thrown off balance by the sudden hostility. "Know what?" "The fever is making him hallucinate, Scavenger. Wasteland rot boils the brain." "He named the Warlord," she countered, pointing a trembling finger at the unconscious Warlord. "He knows exactly who took my brother. He kept his mouth shut to ensure I decoded his map." Declan looked away, his jaw tightening. His silence provided a flawless confirmation. The beta prioritized his alpha and his people above all else. A stray human's grief meant nothing compared to the survival of the Iron-Blood wolves. He used my missing blood as a bargaining chip to leash me to his dying pack, and I will never forgive him for it. Bree spun around and marched toward the wooden chair in the corner. Cormac's ruined leather jacket lay draped over the backrest. She grabbed the collar, ignoring the sticky residue of his blood on the lapels. She plunged her hand into the interior pocket. Her fingers brushed the familiar, thick texture of the waterproof parchment. She yanked the Sector 4 map free and shoved it deep into the pocket of her own canvas jacket. "Put that back," Declan warned, stepping forward. The relaxed soldier vanished, replaced by the lethal second-in-command. "Try and stop me," Bree challenged, locking her hazel eyes on him. "Your boss is out cold. Your rover has a severed fuel line. Your camp is full of dead, feral rogues. You have bigger problems than a mechanic walking out the front door." She did not wait for his response. Bree shoved the wooden door open and marched out into the dirt courtyard. The aftermath of the daylight breach left the compound in ruins. Enforcers dragged the emaciated rogue corpses toward a fire pit near the perimeter fence. The lingering stench of the spilled fuel burned her throat. The dark puddle now soaked stain in the dry earth beneath the disabled tactical rover. Bree marched straight to the vehicle. Her canvas satchel sat on the passenger seat, separated from her by the jammed steel door. She walked around the front grille, stepping over a stray piece of scrap metal, and approached the open driver's side door. She climbed up, planting her knee on the leather driver's seat. She leaned across the wide center console, her thick canvas jacket catching on the gear shift. She grabbed the strap of her satchel and hauled it over the console. She dropped back down to the dirt, the bag hitting her hip with a comforting weight. She unbuckled the main flap, verifying the contents. The canteen of purified water sat intact. Beside it, the taped handle of her silver-plated hunting knife offered a silent promise of defense. She slung the satchel over her shoulder. Before turning away, she noticed a heavy, olive-green canvas bag resting on the floorboards behind the driver's seat. Declan's emergency gear. Bree reached in and pulled the zipper. A military-style gas mask sat inside, the glass eyepieces uncracked and the twin filters sealed. She snatched the mask, shoved it into her satchel, and slammed the driver's side door shut. The enforcers guarding the main gates watched her approach. They carried long barrel rifles, their expressions grim. But Cormac's previous Alpha command echoed in their minds. She held his protection. None of them raised a weapon to block her path. Bree walked past the iron stakes, leaving the Ironblood compound behind. She set her sights on the jagged, toxic horizon of Sector 4, ready to face the Warlord alone. Chapter 18. The outer edge of Sector 4 resembled a graveyard of towering steel and shattered glass. Bree navigated the desolate maze, her boots crunching over chunks of collapsed concrete. The toxic sky overhead shifted from bruised purple to a sickly, suffocating amber. Ash drifted through the dead air, settling like gray snow on the rusted, skeletal structures of pre-war skyscrapers. Every step sent a jolt of raw pain shooting up her right leg. The blister on her heel throbbed against the leather of her boot, but she refused to stop. She unfolded the thick, waterproof parchment, tracing the graphite cipher on the back. The winding path forced her through narrow alleyways and abandoned commercial blocks, avoiding the incendiary traps lining the main boulevard. Miles away, inside the Ironblood compound, the bitter roots finished their brutal work. Cormac opened his golden eyes. The fever had broken. The jagged bite wound on his chest ran raw and tender, but the yellow wasteland rot was gone, leaving clean, healing tissue in its wake. He sat up on the metal table, ignoring Maeve's sharp protests. His intense body heat flared, burning away the lingering chill of the infection. "Where is she?" Cormac demanded, his voice a rough, dangerous scrape. Declan stood by the door, his posture rigid. "She took her map and walked out the gates an hour ago. She heard your fever confession, boss. She knows you hid the truth about the Warlord holding her brother." Cormac did not waste breath on excuses. He swung his legs off the table. He grabbed his ruined leather jacket from the wooden chair, shoving his arms into the sleeves. He left the front open, the scarred skin of his chest exposed to the air. The alpha predator pushed past his beta, following the undeniable fading scent of rain leading out of the camp. Deep in the ruins, Bree stopped inside the shell of a collapsed bank. The marble floor sat buried under a decade of dirt and debris. She leaned against a cracked stone pillar to catch her breath. She reached into her pants pocket, pulling out the broken brass pocket watch. She rubbed her thumb over the cracked glass face, seeking a fraction of comfort in the desolation. A piece of rubble clattered to the floor behind her. Bree shoved the watch into her pocket. She dropped her hand into her canvas satchel, her fingers locking around the taped handle of her silver-plated hunting knife. She drew the blade, spinning around to face the shadows. Cormac stepped out from behind a ruined teller counter. He looked like a nightmare walking out of the wasteland. The torn leather jacket hung open, framing the fresh scar on his chest. Dust coated his dark canvas pants. He favored his right side, the older silver burn on his bicep pulling tight. Despite the injuries, his presence dominated the ruined room. He should be dead from that feral bite, yet here he stands, an unstoppable force of nature tracking me down, Bree realized, tightening her grip on the silver weapon. "Turn around and go back to your camp," Bree warned, raising the blade. Cormac closed the distance in 3 long strides. He did not care about the weapon. He stopped a foot away, the heat rolling off his skin, fighting the chill of the ruins. "You cannot survive this sector alone, Bree. Put the knife away." "You lied to me!" Her voice shook, fueled by a potent mix of exhaustion and rage. "You looked me in the eye, bargained for my map, and never mentioned the Warlord. You let me think I was wandering blind." "I secured an alliance," Cormac stated, his amber irises locked onto her face. He did not offer an apology. He offered facts. "If I told you the truth in that alley, you would have run straight into the Warlord's fortress to die. You needed my pack's protection. I needed your cipher." "It was not your choice to make." She lunged, driving the flat side of the blade against his chest. She refused to cut him, but she wanted to hurt him. Cormac caught her wrist. His heavy iron ring bit into her skin. He stopped her momentum with effortless strength, pulling her flush against his chest. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. "I am making the choice now," Cormac rumbled, his voice vibrating with absolute, ruthless conviction. "We find the clean water sanctuary. And then, I will burn Sector 4 to the ground to get your brother back. You are not doing this alone." Chapter 19. The ruined bank faded into the distance as Cormac and Bree pushed deeper into the hostile territory. The tension between them remained a physical barrier, thick and impenetrable. Bree kept her silver-plated hunting knife sheathed inside her canvas satchel, but her hand rested near the flap. Cormac led the way, his broad shoulders navigating the debris-choked streets with predatory grace. They reached the edge of the central transit hub just as the amber sky gave way to a starless night. A massive, unnatural cloud filled the sunken plaza ahead. The toxic smog field rolled across the cracked asphalt like a living creature, swallowing the concrete arches of the underground entrance. The fog carried a sickening, bruised purple tint. The air at the perimeter tasted bitter, a harsh, chemical flavor that coated the back of Bree's throat. Cormac stopped dead in his tracks. His chest heaved as he inhaled a fraction of the tainted air. A violent shudder ripped through his massive frame. He stumbled backward, bracing his hand against a rusted lamppost. The heat radiating from his skin spiked, his body instantly fighting a microscopic war. "Wolfsbane," Cormac rasped, his voice tight with sudden, crippling pain. Bree stared at the purple smog. The warlord utilized the toxic flower to create a defensive barrier around his stronghold. To a normal human, the chemical fog meant severe respiratory distress. To a lycanthrope, it delivered an agonizing, suffocating death. The poison would strip his fast healing, shut down his lungs, and kill him within minutes. He cannot survive 10 steps in that fog, and a detour will cost us hours we do not possess, Bree calculated, dropping her canvas satchel to the cracked pavement. She unbuckled the main flap and dug past her canteen. She pulled out the military-style gas mask she took from Declan's gear. The olive-green rubber felt cold in her hands. She only possessed 1 unit. "Put this on," Bree demanded, stepping up to the Alpha. Cormac glared down at the mask, his golden eyes flashing with stubborn fury. He pushed her hands away, his touch burning hot against her skin. "No. Your lungs cannot filter the chemicals. You wear it." "I will hold my breath." "You cannot hold your breath for a quarter-mile sprint through a subterranean hub," Bree shouted, her frustration boiling over. She grabbed the lapels of his open leather jacket, jerking him forward. "Your immune system is already compromised from the feral rot. 1 gasp of that purple poison and you die on the asphalt." "I am the Alpha," he growled, the heavy command bleeding into his tone. "You wear the mask." Bree ignored the physical weight of his command. She utilized his momentary weakness against him. She lunged upward, shoving the rubber seal of the gas mask directly over his face. She grabbed the thick, elastic straps and snapped them over the back of his dark hair, locking the twin filters into place over his mouth and nose. Cormac grabbed her wrists, ready to rip the device off, but Bree stepped back, putting herself out of his reach. "I am a scavenger. I have breathed toxic air my entire life," Bree lied, her voice steady. She pulled the collar of her thick canvas jacket up, covering her nose and mouth. "Follow me." She did not wait for his argument. Bree turned and plunged straight into the bruised purple smog. The fog swallowed her instantly. Visibility dropped to less than 3 feet. The chemical air burned her eyes, forcing tears down her cheeks. She took shallow, rapid breaths through the thick canvas fabric, but the bitter poison slipped through the weave. It scorched her throat like swallowed glass. Fire bloomed in her lungs. Cormac stayed right behind her, his huge hand gripping the back of her jacket to keep them connected in the blinding smoke. The gas mask hissed with every breath he took, the twin filters scrubbing the wolfsbane from the air. Bree kept her boots moving, navigating the slope leading down into the transit hub. Her vision began to blur. Black spots danced across the purple haze. Her knees buckled, the poison stripping the oxygen from her blood, but she refused to stop walking. Chapter 20. The descent into the underground transit hub felt like an endless nightmare. The bruised purple fog grew thicker, choking the narrow subterranean corridors. Bree's legs turned to lead. The burning sensation in her lungs transformed into a crushing, physical pressure. She gasped, pulling a lungful of unfiltered poison into her chest. Her vision tunneled into total darkness. Her knees hit the concrete. The last thing she felt was Cormac's hands catching her shoulders before the wasteland swallowed her consciousness. Awareness returned in agonizing, jagged pieces. Bree opened her eyes. The bruised purple haze was gone, replaced by the harsh, blinding glare of a caged halogen bulb. Her cheek rested against a freezing, solid steel floor. She coughed, the violent spasm tearing through her raw throat. It felt like she had swallowed hot coals. She pushed her hands against the cold metal, forcing her torso off the ground. Her canvas satchel was missing. Her thick canvas jacket was gone, leaving her in her standard long-sleeve scavenger shirt. She reached down to her right boot out of sheer habit, but her silver-plated hunting knife had been packed in her missing bag. She was stripped of her weapons. Do not move too fast. The poison is still cycling through your blood. Cormac sat in the corner of the room, his knees drawn up, resting his arms on his thighs. The Warlord's guards had stripped the Alpha of his torn leather jacket, leaving him bare-chested. The thick silver scar on his bicep and the fresh, raw bite wound on his chest stood out in stark contrast to his skin. He retained his dark canvas pants and the heavy iron ring on his hand, but the gas mask was gone. Bree scanned the room. 4 walls of riveted steel, a heavy iron door with a sliding viewing slot. No windows, no vents. A perfect, inescapable cage. "Where are we?" Bree croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "The Warlord's stronghold," Cormac answered. He pushed himself off the floor, his massive frame filling the cramped cell. He crossed the steel plating and crouched beside her. His intense body heat provided a small comfort against the freezing floor. "You collapsed at the end of the smog tunnel. I carried you out, right into a squad of sentries carrying rifles. We have prisoners. I survived the toxic ruins and a feral rogue attack, only to wake up locked in a metal box awaiting execution," Bree thought, a bitter laugh dying in her throat before it could start. She sat back against the steel wall, pulling her knees to her chest. Her pocket felt heavy. She slipped her hand inside and found the broken brass pocket watch still resting there. The sentries took her weapons and her bag, but ignored the piece of broken junk. It was a tiny, meaningless victory, but she clung to it. Heavy boots echoed in the corridor outside their cage. The sound of metal scraping against metal signaled the key turning in the heavy iron door. Cormac stood up, placing himself between Bree and the entrance. The Alpha Predator pushed his exhaustion aside, his golden eyes locking onto the opening door. His muscles coiled tight, ready to unleash brutal violence on whoever stepped through the frame. The heavy door swung outward. 2 huge guards stepped inside, aiming scavenged rifles directly at Cormac's chest. A third man walked into the cell, stepping between the armed guards. He wore a pristine, tailored suit, a grotesque display of exorbitant wealth in the middle of a starving wasteland. His dark hair was slicked back, and his pale gray eyes held a hollow, chilling emptiness. He surveyed the cage, an arrogant smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. In his right hand, the warlord held Bree's silver-plated hunting knife. He tapped the flat side of the deadly blade against his palm, his gray eyes shifting past the Alpha to lock onto the mechanic sitting on the floor. "A warlord and a scavenger walk into my city," the man mocked, his voice smooth and lethally calm. "I must say, I am eager to hear the punchline." Chapter 21. The warlord stepped over the threshold of the riveted steel cell, bringing the chill of the wasteland with him. His tailored suit was a sickening display of hoarded wealth in a starving world. The charcoal fabric lacked a single speck of dust. The stitching ran flawless along the seams. He looked like a pre-war ghost, untouched by the toxic rot claiming the outside ruins. Behind him, 2 guards filled the doorway. They held pre-war rifles, the iron sights aimed directly at Cormac's bare chest. "A warlord and a scavenger walk into my city," the man mocked, his voice a smooth, deadly calm. "I must say, I am eager to hear the punchline." He twirled Bree's silver-plated hunting knife in his right hand. The metal caught the harsh glare of the caged halogen bulb overhead. He admired the weapon, tracing a manicured thumb over the taped handle. He ignored Bree entirely, treating her like furniture, and locked his pale gray eyes on the alpha predator standing in the center of the cage. Cormac did not flinch. He stood tall, his broad shoulders squared against the threat. His intense body heat flared, fighting the freezing temperature of the steel floor. The thick silver scar on his right bicep pulsed with tension. The raw, healing tissue on his upper chest, the remnant of the feral rogue bite, gleamed under the lights. He wore his dark canvas pants and the heavy iron ring on his hand, stripped of his armor but radiating lethal intent. "You talk too much," Cormac grunted, his voice a low, gravel rasp. "Where is the clean water?" The warlord laughed. The sound held zero humor. It echoed off the metal walls, hollow and grating. He stopped spinning the knife and pointed the silver tip at Cormac's throat. "The sanctuary belongs to me," the warlord stated, taking a slow step forward. "Just like the boy belongs to me. Just like this little mechanic belongs to me. You wandered into my domain, dog. You want the water to save your dying pack? You pay my price." Bree pushed herself off the freezing wall. She stood up, her long-sleeved scavenger shirt offering zero protection against the cold. She shoved her hands into her pants pockets, her right fingers wrapping around the broken brass pocket watch. It tethered her to reality. The warlord possessed her weapons, her map, and her brother, but he did not possess her spirit. "What is the price?" Bree demanded. The warlord shifted his pale gaze to her. He smiled, a thin, cruel stretch of his lips. He raised the silver-plated knife and pressed the flat of the blade against her cheek. The metal felt like ice. The silver poison did not burn human skin, but the sharp edge promised violence. "The price is submission," the warlord purred, turning his attention back to the Alpha. "Drop to your knees. Swear your pack to my banner. Relinquish the Iron Blood title to me. You become my enforcer, or I carve this scavenger into pieces while you watch." Cormac's golden eyes darkened. The inner beast surged against his ribs, demanding blood. He looked at the silver blade pressed against Bree's face. He calculated the distance, the speed of the rifle guards, the angle of the knife. If he bows to this tyrant, the Iron-Blood wolves lose their only shield, and my life is not worth that sacrifice, Bree thought, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Do it, the warlord urged, pressing the knife a fraction harder. A tiny bead of crimson welled up on Bree's cheek. Cormac's jaw locked. He lowered his chin. He let out a harsh, defeated breath and bent his right knee. The Alpha prepared to kneel in the dirt for her. A deafening roar shattered the moment. The corridor outside the cell erupted in a blinding flash of orange fire. The shockwave hit the steel walls like a runaway freight train. The heavy iron door at the end of the cell block blew off its structural hinges, tearing the concrete archway to rubble. The explosion knocked the warlord forward, sending him crashing into the steel wall. Bree dropped to the floor, covering her ears as dust and smoke flooded the prison block. Declan had arrived. Chapter 22. Acrid smoke poured through the open cell doorway. The sulfur stench burned Bree's nose, masking the scent of blood and fear. The two guards in the corridor stumbled, their ears ringing from the concussive blast. They lowered their rifles, blinded by the thick gray dust filling the subterranean block. Cormac did not hesitate. He launched himself forward, a blur of dark canvas and scarred muscle. He collided with the first guard, driving a brutal knee into the man's armored stomach. The guard folded in half, dropping his rifle to the metal grating. Cormac grabbed the second guard by the tactical vest, lifting him off his boots. With a vicious heave, the Alpha hurled the man across the corridor. The guard smashed into a rusted utility panel on the opposite wall. The metal panel buckled and burst open, spilling a shower of sparks and loose tools onto the floor. The warlord scrambled to his feet inside the cell. He still gripped the silver-plated hunting knife. He took one look at the enraged Alpha tearing his sentries apart and chose self-preservation. He bolted out the door, sprinting down the smoky corridor toward the transit hub. Bree ignored the fleeing tyrant. She scrambled out of the cell on her hands and knees. She needed a weapon. She crawled toward the shattered utility panel. Amidst the scattered screws and broken wire casings, a heavy iron maintenance wrench lay on the grate. The tool was long, coated in ancient grease, and weighed a solid 10 pounds. She grabbed the steel handle. It felt perfect in her grip. "Find the boy!" Cormac ordered over the din of the alarms. He snatched a dropped rifle from the floor and swung it like a club, shattering the jaw of a reinforcing guard rushing down the hall. Bree sprinted in the opposite direction, gripping the heavy iron wrench. Declan and a squad of Iron-Blood fighters poured through the blown-out checkpoint, engaging the warlord's security forces in brutal, close-quarters combat. The corridor became a chaotic war zone. She ran past the fighting, scanning the riveted iron doors lining the cell block. Faded numbers painted in white marked each cage. 2 years of chasing ghosts through the ruins end right behind one of these rusted iron doors, she promised herself, pushing her burning legs to move faster. She checked the viewing slots. Cell 38 held empty shadows. Cell 39 contained piled trash. She reached cell 42 and skidded to a halt. The viewing slot was smeared with grime, but the harsh corridor lights illuminated the interior. A young man lay curled on the freezing floor. He wore ragged, torn scavenger clothes. His dark brown hair hung in a matted tangle over his face. He was emaciated, his cheekbones jutting sharp against his pale skin, but Bree recognized the familiar slope of his shoulders. "Toby!" Bree screamed, slamming her hands against the iron door. The boy flinched, but he lacked the strength to lift his head. The warlord had starved him, breaking his body to ensure compliance. Bree stepped back, raising the heavy iron wrench over her shoulder. She aimed for the mechanical lock housing. She swung with all her strength. The iron tool struck the steel lock with a deafening clang. The vibration rattled her bones, but the mechanism held. She swung again and again. On the fourth brutal strike, the rusted internal tumblers shattered. She kicked the heavy door inward. Bree dropped the wrench and fell to her knees beside her brother. She pulled his head into her lap, her hands shaking as she brushed the filthy hair from his eyes. Toby blinked, his hazel eyes clouded with exhaustion and disbelief. "Bree," he rasped, his voice a broken whisper. "I have you," she choked out, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "We are leaving." She grabbed his arm, trying to pull him up, but Toby's legs gave out. He collapsed against her shoulder, dead weight. He was far too weak to walk. Chapter 23. Declan materialized in the doorway of cell 42, his bright blue eyes taking in the desperate scene. He holstered his sidearm and crossed the cramped room in 2 strides. "Let me," the beta instructed. He scooped the emaciated boy into his arms, lifting Toby with effortless lichen strength. "I will get him to the surface. The healers will keep him breathing." Bree stood up, her chest heaving. She reached down and picked up the heavy iron maintenance wrench from the floor. The grease stained her palms, but she welcomed the solid weight of the tool. "Get him out of here, Declan. I have a debt to settle." She ran out of the cell block, following the trail of destruction Cormac left in his wake. The corridor opened into the central transit hub. The subterranean cavern was vast. Rusted subway tracks cut through the center of the floor. Giant power turbines lined the far wall, humming with electrical current and bathing the area in harsh, blinding halogen light. Cormac stood near the edge of the tracks, his chest heaving. The raw tissue of his healing wound gleamed with sweat. The Alpha stalked forward, cornering his prey. The Warlord stood with his back against the main power grid breaker box. He had discarded Bree's silver knife. In his right hand, he held a long, braided leather whip. The weapon looked standard until the harsh lights caught the glint of the razor-sharp silver wire woven through the leather strands. "You think you can take my city?" the Warlord sneered, snapping his wrist. The whip cracked through the air. The silver-laced tip struck Cormac across his bare chest. The metal wire bit deep into his flesh, slicing a diagonal line over his collarbone. The silver poison flared on contact. A sickening sizzle echoed over the hum of the turbines, accompanied by the distinct smell of scorched meat. Cormac roared, a furious, deep-chested sound that shook the dust from the ceiling. He stumbled, the silver poison sending a shockwave of agony through his nervous system. The Warlord laughed, drawing his arm back to deliver a second lethal strike. Bree sprinted along the perimeter wall, staying in the Warlord's blind spot. She analyzed the tyrant's strategy. The Warlord possessed a normal human's vision. He relied entirely on the blinding halogen lights to track the Alpha's blazing speed and aim the silver whip. He wants to play with silver in the light, so I will bury him in the dark, Bree determined, tightening her grip on the heavy wrench. She reached the huge power breaker box bolted to the wall behind the Warlord. Thick bundles of exposed cables fed into the central conduit, powering the entire transit hub. Bree did not hesitate. She raised the heavy iron wrench high above her head and brought it down on the main glass fuses. The impact shattered the casing. A shower of blue and white sparks erupted from the grid, raining down on the concrete floor. The turbines groaned, a dying mechanical whine that signaled a total system failure. The halogen bulbs popped. Total pitch black fell over the subterranean cavern, swallowing the room in an instant. The warlord gasped, the sudden darkness blinding him completely. The crack of the whip faltered, striking empty air. "Guards! Restore the lights!" Bree dropped the wrench, stepping back from the sparking wires. She could not see her own hands, but she did not need to. She heard the scrape of Cormac's boots on the concrete. The Alpha did not need light. The wolf thrived in the dark. Cormac's golden eyes ignited in the pitch black, glowing with predatory, unhinged fury. The advantage shifted, final and brutal. A heavy thud echoed across the room as the Alpha lunged, followed by the terrifying sound of the warlord screaming in the dark. Chapter 24. The subterranean transit hub plunged into pitch blackness. The dying whine of the shattered turbines echoed off the cavern walls, followed by the terrifying, ragged breaths of the blinded tyrant. The warlord scrambled backward. His leather shoes slipped on the concrete floor. He snapped his wrist, cracking the silver-laced whip through the empty, dark air. The metal wire struck nothing but rusted steel pillars. Cormac did not make a sound. The Alpha shed his exhaustion the moment the lights died. His golden eyes ignited in the dark, tracking the frantic movements of the pristine, tailored suit. The warlord swung the whip a second time. Cormac lunged. He ignored the blistering agony of the fresh silver slash across his collarbone. He caught the warlord's wrist mid-swing. The Alpha squeezed, his heavy iron ring digging into bone. A sickening snap shattered the cavern quiet. The warlord shrieked, dropping the lethal whip to the floor. Cormac drove a brutal fist into the tyrant's ribs, lifting the man off his feet. The warlord slammed into a concrete support beam and crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he hit the dust. Bree stayed low. The freezing steel floor bit through the knees of her canvas pants. She swept her bare hands across the dark grating, searching for her discarded weapon. Her fingers brushed rusted bolts and broken glass. She crawled forward a few inches. Her knuckles bumped against cold, smooth metal. She grabbed the taped handle of her silver-plated hunting knife. Nearby, she felt the rough texture of her canvas jacket and satchel tossed in a heap by the guards. She snatched them up, feeling the heavy crinkle of the map still in the pocket, and pushed herself upright. Emergency backup generators engaged deep within the transit hub. A mechanical groan vibrated through the floorboards. Dim, amber bulbs flickered to life along the perimeter walls, casting long, menacing shadows across the ruins. Cormac stood over the broken warlord. The Alpha's dark canvas pants were smeared with ash. His massive chest told a brutal story of survival. The old, thick silver scar marked his right bicep. The raw, healing tissue from the feral bite sat red and angry over his heart. Above that, the fresh whip slash spanned his collarbone. The silver wire burn sizzled, a stubborn, toxic wound defying his fast healing. Intense heat radiated from his skin, fighting the cold air of the cavern. He turned away from the defeated tyrant. Bree, her voice still raspy from the smog, pointed toward the rear of the cavern. "The cipher. It marked the turbines. The vault is behind them." Cormac nodded and walked toward the steel blast doors hidden in the shadows of the massive engines. Bree skidded to the control panel beside the seam. She ripped a loose wire from the darkness and jammed it into the manual release. A heavy thud of shifting gears echoed through the cavern. "Now!" she screamed. Cormac wedged his bare hands into the center seam. With the locks disengaged, he put his full alpha strength into the metal. The muscles in his back corded and strained until, with a scream of protesting steel, the doors finally slid wide. A rush of cold, damp air flooded the transit hub. Bree walked toward the vault, her boots crunching over the shattered glass of the breaker box. She stopped beside the Alpha, her hazel eyes widening. Beyond the steel doors, a subterranean river carved a path through a smooth concrete channel. The water ran pure, crystal clear, and endless. This single resource held an exorbitant value. It was enough to buy an entire sector, enough to build an empire. Cormac looked down at her. His golden eyes held no arrogance, only a steady, unspoken promise. He had delivered the sanctuary. The Ironblood pack would survive the winter. Bree stared at the rushing current, the magnitude of the discovery washing over her. She gripped her silver knife. She thought of the matte black hoverbike she abandoned in the alley miles away. She thought of the open wasteland, the freedom of a solitary scavenger life. Then, she thought of the emaciated boy Declan carried toward the surface. Toby possessed no strength. The warlord had starved him into a fragile ghost. I fought a brutal war to win my freedom, but walking away now means signing my brother's death warrant. Her choice vanished. Toby required Maeve's bitterroot medicines. He needed the protection of the perimeter fences and the warmth of the concrete bunkers. He needed the Ironblood pack. Bree slid the silver-plated hunting knife back into her pocket. She reached out and wrapped her hand around Cormac's thick wrist, mindful of the sizzling silver burn on his chest. His intense body heat seeped into her skin, grounding her. "Take us home," Bree stated. She looked toward the garage at the end of the hub where the warlord's personal transport sat idling. With the guards scattered in the blackout, they loaded Toby and the first crates of pure water into the back. As they sped out of the subterranean fortress, Bree looked at the Alpha beside her. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a pack. Chapter 25. 3 days of harsh wasteland sun baked the toxic ruins, providing just enough light for Bree to finally patch the rover's severed fuel line with scavenged tubing. With the machine breathing again, the pack had spent 48 hours running back and forth to the hub. Now, Bree sat on the edge of her iron cot. The electric heater on the wall finally hummed with life. She had fixed it that morning with a set of real tools from the hub. The room was no longer a walk-in freezer, and the machine was no longer a monument to her lost wrench, but a sign of her new power. She wore her standard long-sleeve scavenger shirt and canvas pants, the fabric stiff with dust from the journey back to the Ironblood compound. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the broken brass pocket watch. She traced the cracked glass face with her thumb. The object no longer represented a desperate goal. It served as a reminder of the life she just traded away. Bree stood up, slipping the watch back into her pocket. She unlatched the heavy steel door and stepped out into the dirt courtyard. Near the perimeter fence, the space where the rogue enforcer once stood was empty. Declan had confirmed his exile the night they returned. The enforcer had been found with a pouch of the warlord's silver credits. He had traded his pack's safety for a chance to live in the hub. Now, he was a lone wolf in a wasteland that didn't forgive traitors. The compound hummed with life. Enforcers hauled the first crates of purified water from the back of the warlord's stolen transport. Nearby, the tactical rover sat with its hood open, ready to join the next supply run once its new fuel line was pressure tested. The toxic smog still choked the horizon outside the iron perimeter stakes, but the pack no longer feared the poison in the ground. They possessed life. She walked to the healer's den and pushed the wooden door open. Toby lay on a narrow cot in the corner, years of neglect. She stood beside him, years of neglect. She stood beside him now, forcing a cup of the life-saving broth into his hands. Declan leaned against the doorframe, his bright blue eyes tracking her arrival. "The kid hates the soup," Declan noted, a smirk breaking his relaxed posture. "I told him the feral rogues taste better, but he refuses to try a bite." Toby managed a weak, raspy laugh, clutching the tin cup. Cormac ducked under the wooden doorframe, stepping into the den. He wore fresh, dark canvas pants. His broad torso remained bare. The silver whip slash across his collarbone had formed a thick, angry red scar, matching the older mark on his right bicep. The feral bite on his chest was nothing more than a faint ridge of new skin. His intense body heat warmed the cramped room. He stopped in front of Bree. He extended his right hand, the heavy iron ring catching the ambient light. "The pack waits," Cormac rumbled, his voice a low, commanding scrape. Bree looked down at his scarred hand. She possessed no regal garments. She carried grease under her fingernails and a silver knife in her boot. "I spent my life scavenging rusted scraps from the dirt, yet this apex predator looks at me like I hold the sun in my hands." She placed her palm in his. Cormac led her out of the healer's den and into the center of the dirt courtyard. The entire Ironblood pack stood in a massive circle. Hundreds of wolves watched them. The silence was absolute. The unbonded females who glared at her days ago now kept their eyes fixed on the ground in a display of total respect. Cormac dropped her hand. He turned to face his people. He did not yell. He pushed the heavy alpha command deep into his chest, letting the raw power vibrate through the air. "She is your Luna," Cormac declared, the force of his words hitting the wolves like a physical wave. "Her word is my word. You protect her with your lives." He turned back to Bree, his golden eyes locked onto hers, shedding the warlord to reveal the devoted mate beneath. He stepped into her space, crowding her against his chest. He tilted her head to the side, exposing the pale skin of her neck. Cormac bit down. The initial pierce of his fangs delivered a sharp, blinding sting. As he tasted her blood again, he let out a low, dark growl of satisfaction. The ultimate healing. A heartbeat later, a rush of dominant, possessive warmth flooded her veins. The claiming mark sealed the bond, tying her soul to the Alpha and the pack in an unbreakable iron tether. Cormac pulled back, his chest heaving. A single drop of blood smeared the corner of his mouth. Around them, the wolves moved in absolute unison. Knees hit the dirt, heads bowed low. Declan dropped to one knee at the front of the crowd, bowing his sandy blonde head to the human scavenger. Bree stood in the center of the kneeling monsters. She touched the fresh mark on her neck, staring out at the lethal army submitting to her rule. She was no longer a stray. She was the queen of the wasteland. The end. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Bree had guts for trying to patch up a bleeding warlord with a stale bandage, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear how this disaster happens. Click the video on your screen right now. It is totally wild.